Hello and welcome to Perch Peak Pods, the only place to get long form interviews with some of the world's leading global mobility experts. A very exciting, extra special guest with us today, our first ever in-house global mobility leader. This time we're going a little bit on not really on the service provider side, but we're looking at all things recruitment within global mobility. I'm delighted to have a real leader in the recruitment space, Lucy Mason, Recruitment Director at Corporate Resources Recruitment. Lucy, introduce yourself to the community and tell us a little bit about how you sort of fell into the world of helping people get jobs in the wonderful world of mobility.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be on here. So, super excited today. But yeah, I kind of, as I think everyone does in global mobility and in recruitment more, so you really do fall in. It was never
Yeah.
planned. And even, 8 years ago, if I'm being truthful, I didn't realize it was an industry. It was a much bigger industry, so much more complex than I thought it was. There's so many different intricacies and areas of the mobility world. So yeah, very much fell into global mobility recruitment 8 years ago and never really looked back. It's an industry, and I think on the in-house side as well, in particular, once you're in it, you stay in it. So it's one of those industries. So yeah, it's been a journey. It's definitely seen a lot of different markets.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Well, looking forward to diving in because it's such a topical time, because I'm sure you're seeing this as well. Lots of people coming back from summer holidays, starting to think a little bit about what could be next, seeing, a little bit of the activity, shall we say. So really this one today is all about building your career in the wonderful industry of global mobility. And let's start on that. You're obviously helping people get jobs in the industry every day, every week. Most people listening to this, they're GM leaders, GM managers. Maybe they're thinking about, okay, what might my next role look like? What advice do you have for those job seekers in global mobility?
I think it's been a very different year to begin with as well. So, a lot of people that I speak to, particularly kind of the GM leaders, they may have been in their roles for, 3-4 years plus at a minimum. And it's a very different market to what it was, pre-pandemic in particular. So I think first off, if you are thinking of a new role, is to think this isn't what it was going to be. You do need, people I speak to don't even have a CV, and it completely can't in that respect. There's so much more focus around the technology side of things. So, looking at LinkedIn as a particularly powerful tool now, that's probably a whole nother podcast in itself.
Yeah.
Go into, how to stand out in the crowd. I think the other kind of thing as well is looking at your network. That's very powerful in mobility. It's very, it's a very tight niche industry, as everybody knows. A lot of people know other people, and referrals is such a big thing as well. I think that's quite an important part of it.
So much to dig into. Let's actually go back to the LinkedIn one, because as you say, it's LinkedIn's on an absolute tear as a purchase by Microsoft, but as a company, certainly from my perspective, that's always for late stage candidates, first place I go, check them out, what they're doing. For people that maybe haven't used their LinkedIn previously as part of their sort of CV / application, what are the top 2 or 3 things you would recommend people to do when sort of rebooting their LinkedIn for a job search?
Yeah, definitely. It really does go back to basics. Some of the things that I'm probably going to say sound incredibly simple, but so many people forget to do it or don't think it's an important part of their job search now. It's almost, people on their CV, the first thing probably hiring managers do is look at people's LinkedIn profiles. That's kind of the first thing. I don't know if you've perhaps done it in the past when hiring, but
Yeah.
naturally, it's the first thing that a lot of people do. So first things first is to update it. It doesn't need to have, reams of information. It doesn't necessarily need to be an online CV. But things like your profile picture, that's a really important part of it. And even for myself, when I've been, I use LinkedIn as I'm on it morning, noon, and nights. And the statistics, even having a profile picture in comparison to not having one, you get 21 more times and more engagement from hiring managers, recruiters. It's a big statistic, isn't it? And you get 9 times more connection requests if you have a profile picture. So that's one really important, again, super simple, super basic.
Yeah.
And again, a lot of people don't do it. So that's a key one, I think.
I love that. So one quick one, probably, you can, doesn't necessarily even need to be, let's see, if you have professional quality, great, but something is better than nothing. So an easy one to turn around, and it doesn't. And that leads nicely onto the point you mentioned around using your network. So because I think that's something that comes up repeatedly during the podcast, is it is an industry where people know each other. There's obviously a lot of vendor mobility manager partnerships. So there is a lot of interplay, and typically GM teams are quite small. So relying on network for advice, etc., often comes back as a real aid. One thing we do hear from people, though, is either I'm too busy to build my network, completely fair enough. It's like, it is on top of your day job at the end of the day. Or B, where do I start? Isn't that a bit icky? Like, isn't that a bit, it kind of has some negative connotations still, particularly for, I feel for sort of cautious Brits amongst us, which I could say as one. What advice do you have to people who are sort of sitting there thinking, well, I should actually build my network because it might be useful, but maybe they don't know where to start?
Yeah, so I suppose there's probably kind of 2 ways of looking at that. Networking in the sense of utilizing your GM network from people that you may have previously worked with. That could be someone you might have met at industry events. That goes down to recruiters as well. So, instance, someone like myself, who is a recruiter in the GM space. There are other recruiters out there, of course, and utilize your network, start by contacting those people to have come almost this conversation to find out what the market's looking like, how's the last 6 months been, those types of things as well. So you're right. It's the trouble is looking for a job is a full-time job in itself. I always say that.
Exactly.
It's tough. And it's the last thing you want to do, really. You finish your day at whatever time that is, and you don't want to, spend an hour, 2 hours going on to LinkedIn and trawling through jobs and, doing this kind of thing. So, I suppose that's where kind of we come in to hopefully hold the hand and, make that process hopefully easier for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely networking in a sense of, even referrals. So say you may have applied for a position, but you've got a mutual connection perhaps with the hiring manager, and then maybe reach out to that person in that sense. So not necessarily, if you don't have time, which I completely understand, to perhaps go to the, the networking events and things like that. It's those little things that will hopefully help.
Yeah, love that. And definitely, I'm just thinking of a recent example of someone who asked me for a referral, into a GM leader, and they ended up going on to get the role, which is great. And but by the GM leader, they're saying, oh, this person's been referred by a couple of people. That's going to make yourself stand out versus the dozens of others who are maybe potential unknowns. And so that's such a powerful thing to do. It is a friendly industry, so don't be afraid to ask there. You're obviously far too humble to say this outright, but from a job seeker's perspective, so worth speaking to people like yourself as well, who are aware of what's going on in the market. Maybe roles that are potentially coming up as well, which is always amazing if you can sort of get there just before it sort of formally goes live and the flood of applicants starts coming
Exactly.
in.
Yeah, definitely. It's a tough one. It is a tough one. And there's so many things that I could probably say here, but I think in particularly the last few months as well, when, another perhaps tip on your job search is to, one, think about how long it might take. It's not a quick turnaround, unfortunately, like it probably once was. If you're thinking you're starting to kind of get that little bit of an itch to move, do that sooner rather than later, because you could still be in that job, 3-4 months down the line still. So I think that's quite particularly important part of it as well, to kind of manage expectations in that sense.
Yes. Yeah. And it's not, obviously, unfortunately, recently, a lot of it has been sort of driven by layoffs, which can come quite quickly. So, just sometimes you can be blindsided, but if you're proactively thinking of moving, there's people aren't normally hiring for lots of mobility positions at once. So getting ahead of the curve, giving yourself plenty of time, also understanding what skills you maybe are lacking that the market's looking for, or where you could just tighten up one or two things, which is actually what I wanted to ask you next, is where you're helping people receive roles, where you're working with companies to recruit great global in-house global mobility people in particular. What are you seeing as like the key skills that hiring managers are really drilling into and being like, okay, I'm really valuing X, Y, and Z? Like, what are the things that they're consistently saying, oh, I love candidates that have this, and this?
That's a really tricky one, because every company is so different. Every program is completely different. So I think from perhaps more of like a soft skill perspective, because I think the hard skills in the experience can really differ between each company. It could be that one company is looking for someone who has managed huge, moves. They might have 400 or 500 moves a year. So they're looking for someone with that kind of experience. It might be that another company is looking for someone to come in and rewrite their whole policy side of things. So that is a little bit tricky. But from a soft skill perspective, I think it's very much a case of, I think that runs through the industry wholly, in the sense of, having that drive and being able to promote the mobility piece. Again, that is probably something we could talk about until the cows come home, in a sense of promoting mobility internally within companies. But having the gravitas to be able to work with the very key stakeholders, to be able to put the point across of mobility, I think that's a really key piece at the moment. Unfortunately, that's the case that a lot of people I speak to have to fight their corner to keep their mobility kind of program running, and hire and really push kind of the value of it. So I think you have to be quite strong-willed and minded for a lot of these positions, and to be able to show that passion within an interview. And I think a lot of it as well is the empathy side of things within mobility. So, being able to, especially if you're dealing with people, the people on the ground moving, that's a real key skill, I think.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I definitely, something that we've heard quite a few times is, I'm thinking of Mahali at HelloFresh, Tanya when she was at Twilio, saying like, unless the mobility function is really taking on more, driving positive internal change, it's not just a given anymore that a company is going to have a mobility department and you're just going to be able to backfill positions. So there's a lot of pressure to drive really show the impact of the team. And so when people are recruiting, that really reflects on, hey, like, what have you actually driven? And I do find sometimes when I chat with people, they can struggle with that because they often say, but my role's so reactive, I was like, and it can seem a bit bitty and it can seem a bit, I help with this one example, but it can be a bit thin at times. It's like I help with one escalation when actually often trying to like collate the theme of actually consistently worked with X senior stakeholders, consistently handled X amount of total spend, those types of bigger, connecting it to like the bigger, the higher level of your work. I think that stands people in good stead. You mentioned at the start that you've sort of been in the game for 8 years now, very changing markets over those 8 years. Let's actually start with like, what are some of the biggest sort of changes you've seen in the market over the last 8 years?
Oh gosh, where do I start? So I think probably over the last, talking about maybe kind of this year as a real kind of example on that, is that it's very much become an employer's market this year. Even if you just look at the comparison from this year to last year, because as you kind of mentioned in the conversation earlier, there has unfortunately been so many layoffs, so many redundancies worldwide, that there is so much incredible talent out there fighting for, not too many roles. Because again, if you mentioned, a lot of companies are streamlining employee mobility functions as opposed to growing them. So I think that kind of really one key takeaway is that there aren't as many positions now. And they are, one actually thing that I have seen is that a lot of companies trying to integrate roles. And I know we've touched upon this previously, but it's not just the global mobility manager that a lot of companies look for now. It may be that there is a real kind of key immigration piece, perhaps, that they need experience with, or the reward side of things. So I think that's a real shift in the market over the last kind of year or so in particular.
Yes, and let's actually dig in there because we touched on people having to be drivers, take on new things, really take on more almost. What you touched on a couple of there, immigration, reward. What are the like? If you're sitting here, you're a traditional GM leader or traditional GM manager, shall we say, and you're sort of thinking, "Oh, I'm a bit nervous that I haven't done any reward before." What are the like? What like other positions are you seeing being merged with mobility most commonly? Is it reward? Is it travel? Is it, what are you sort of seeing get thrown into the pot first? And secondly, how can people position themselves well if they don't already have experience to say, yeah, I could do that, or I'd learn quickly?
Sure. So definitely the reward and tax piece, I think, has become particularly big. A little bit on the immigration side as well. Not so much travel, I don't see. I do see on the travel side, from what I've personally seen, is that travel is still very much travel. That kind of a business travel role in itself still. So that I haven't seen that merge as much, but certainly the reward side of things and the immigration and tax, they seem to be the real kind of big one. I think for someone who, like you say, perhaps has been in a very much a traditional global mobility position and they haven't had a huge amount of exposure to these areas, is to, if you do need to stand out from the crowd, unfortunately, in this market. So, I've had a couple of recent examples of this where, they may have, they're not necessarily desperate to leave their role, but they may be thinking, okay, in the next 6 months or to a year, let's see if you can touch something like that. So I'd always say to people in these kind of circumstances, are there any other areas of the business that you can work with closely? Can you, if you do report into the head of reward, can you work with the head of reward on an upcoming project? You sit with an immigration specialist within your team that, get really heavily involved in that. So it's a little bit harder. I appreciate that's not going to be the case for a lot of people, but unfortunately there's not kind of a course that you can add to your CV in a lot of
Yeah.
these things. So that it's a little bit tricky.
Yeah, it's. I think you're right. It's almost too late sometimes if you can't just take a 1 week LinkedIn course and that helps you stand out. It's really looking and connecting the dots here, looking to be a driver in your previous role to try and take on. And the good thing is because most HR, most of this rolls up into HR, right? So because most HR teams are under-resourced, people are normally pretty happy if you're offering to help with their team or their project. So at least there is typically opportunity to get that experience. It's just sort of really positioning yourself and, again, not being, whilst it's such a great industry we're in, people are quite humble a lot of the time and sometimes a bit nervous to ask. So I think just asking, hey, can I help with this? Can I help with this? Etc. to try and get that experience. But definitely agree that sort of even a lot of leadership roles being asked to be like reward plus mobility merged together, or benefits plus mobility merged together, often there. Let's look at that more senior end of the market then. GM leaders, people looking to step up. Something that we often hear is it can be hard, the funnel gets pretty thin at the top in terms of GM leaders. Where are you most commonly seeing people try to go when they're like a head of global mobility? Are they looking for heads of GM positions in other organizations, bigger programs, bigger remit, faster growth, whatever it might be? Or are they looking to try and go to a role that is global mobility plus reward, global mobility plus immigration, whatever it might be? What are you seeing as like the typical career paths at the sort of top end?
So a lot of people that I speak to have naturally been in their head of roles for a few years. And what they tend to miss is that they started in 5 years ago and their kind of mission was to rewrite the GM function. We've been in a mess for however many years. We need someone to come in and tidy it up, and build it and to make it a true function. And I think it, in a bizarre way, it's almost like a very long-term project, a lot of these positions. It obviously on a permanent basis still, but a lot of these people do this. They do the project, they built it from the ground up. They've gone in, they've done what they needed to do, and 5 years down, they're like, oh, I feel very one level.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
So a lot of the time I see is that they either want to do that again. So they kind of, they might even go into a standalone position. That's something that I've seen. They want to just go in, they might need policy rewriting and they just need someone dedicated to do that. So that's kind of one avenue. The other one is going in and doing exactly the same thing. And there's they like that building, they like the project side of things, they like fix problems, I guess. That's probably kind of the key thing that I tend to see.
Yeah, that's such a shrewd point that so often it does seem to be like, even for like giant multinationals where it's like, there was nothing when I joined, or I'm just joining and it's been so chaotic, and sat with local HR, and then it is like a 3, 4, 5 year build out, get things, really get the buy-in, here's what we're going to do, defining who's moving, what types of move there are. And then sometimes when that's up and running well, actually some of the project-based work can plateau once things are running well in that role. So then people are looking for, okay, how can I go back and do that again? Depending on the company. So I love that, and I do love like not being afraid to go back to a quote unquote IC role at a fast growing or a newer program where you're building it out, because we've seen that play out a lot where if you can go in, really standardize things, you often can grow your team, grow your sort of position within the company quite quickly. So even though it can seem a risk, and you might have had a 4 or 5 person team historically, if you can get in, add value quickly, you can often get resource to grow the function, which is always great to people. Let's look at then, you mentioned how it's been a tough market, some of the changes over the last 8 years and what job seekers need, and how it's been a pretty tough market this year so far. How's the state of play as of September 2024? Are there any green shoots of optimism in the industry?
Yes, definitely. I'm delighted to say that, because it's been a long road to get here,
Yeah.
I think if you look even in the comparison of, the start of the year, January 2024 to now, we'd be having a really different conversation if there would be in kind of February, March time. It really was extremely tough out there. The redundancies were really in the highs. And I looked at some statistics recently, even just talking about the UK here, and I appreciate this isn't just on global mobility. For the UK as a whole, we've been averaging around about kind of the 100k redundancy per month mark. And that's, yeah, exactly. So, I think the highest was in June, which was 108,000, and it's finally starting to come down, which is really positive to see that. So I think there's been, don't get me wrong, there's been a huge amount of external factors, worldwide to create these, unfortunately, but certainly moving forward, I think, and I'm hoping, I'm not jinxing it here, but I think a lot of companies have done the redundancies that they need to, and now they're moving forward with future plans. So yeah, I think it especially kind of naturally, as September is historically, September, October, November are busier times anyway. Like you said, kids that come back from school, annual leave, unfortunately, is, coming to an end.
Roughly, yeah.
Always helps as well. So, kind of the final push, essentially, for the year.
Yeah, no, and I think definitely this is from my sort of business owner perspective. There was so much pressure from the markets to be capital efficient as we left the sort of zero interest environment, that so many companies, even if they were doing well, were still doing layoffs just to show that they could be capital efficient, trim, be more profitable, and there was a real push for that.
Mm-hmm.
I think, as you mentioned, it feels like a lot of companies are now bumping up against the edges of that and starting to say, oh, crikey, like, we're not going to be able to grow as fast as we'd like without some more hiring, some more team members, some more strategic investment. I think a little bit is, people can't really build careers by just not doing anything.
Yeah.
So people want to like invest, do different projects, etc. So that's naturally sort of pushing a little bit more juice into the industry. And mobility is such a cyclical industry based around new projects, new hiring, etc. So hopefully that will lead to a bit of an upswing as sort of people look into 2025 and saying to achieve our goals with our headcount. And that's amazing data you shared on just the number of redundancies in the UK alone.
Mm-hmm.
Quite staggering, quite staggering, really. And it will be interesting to see how the next couple of months go from that perspective. You shared so many sort of interesting tidbits for people in the industry and amazing data. What's the sort of, and this is a bit of a weird question, but what do you think is the thing you consistently see people getting wrong when they're sort of starting to apply for their jobs? Like, what's one mistake to really avoid making?
I think a lot of the time, and especially in this market as well, it's again kind of going back to those basics. I think a lot of people try and overcomplicate your CV for one. That's a real, CVs are a hard one. I think generally, I think the trouble is CVs are very personal, in the sense of every hiring manager looks for something different in a CV, and I think that as much as there are templates online and you can go and pay for these people to reboot the CV essentially, there's no one format that works for everybody, and I think that's really tricky to navigate that. So I think probably one thing I would say is to make sure, kind of going back to LinkedIn as well, actually, one particular thing is, sounds really silly, but grammar. Proofread your CV.
Yeah.
Get someone else to reread your CV for you. Have a couple of pairs of eyes on it, because people will see different things that you don't see, and you'll be staggered as to how many people no matter what level that they are, what level that they're in their career, the volume of times I've had to, proofread CV. So that's a real basic one to tackle when it's so simple
Yeah,
to deal with as well.
it's so simple, but as you say, it's like when you're sort of reviewing, you're almost looking for reasons to discount people at times if there's a lot of applications, and grammar's such an easy one. It's so easy when you're sort of looking at the same document over and over, right? You stop seeing it. You just stop seeing it altogether. So really solid advice there. As you know, we have a tradition on the pod of the previous guest leaving a question for the next guest. And you've got a really nice one today, which I think you're going to enjoy, which is what energizes you about working in global mobility?
I'm so grateful for that because I speak to people from all different areas of the world. I speak to people from all different types of backgrounds. Their programs are so different. So just, I could speak to people for, up to an hour that go really delving into their job search, into just having a conversation with them. A lot of the time I just speak to people to catch up with them. So I think the people and how they drive the industry is certainly the one for me, for sure.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And often so well traveled, so interesting, so genuinely passionate about their work and what they do, which is just such a pleasure.
Yeah, definitely.
Relative to some other industries. Well, Lucy, you've been such a great guest. I've absolutely loved digging into all things global mobility careers with you. And thanks for being sharing so much data as well as so many anecdotes about your sort of time on the ground in the field, helping people do battle with the difficult job market. So it's been great having you on. Thanks very much, and good job by you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been great to have a conversation this morning. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Cheers, Lucy.